All right, welcome back to College Football Addiction, ACC Championship week, and we got Billy Embody on. We will talk a little bit about SMU, their mindset coming into this thing, coming in as a favorite. We talked before the season, Billy, and we talked about there was maybe an outside chance, a path to get into Charlotte, or maybe surprising some people. If I'd have told you though, beginning of the season, like SMU is going to be the favorite when we talk ACC Championship week, I don't even know if the most diehard SMU fans would have believed that would be the case.
Yeah, there's a lot of things we wouldn't have thought about this season, and unfortunately for FSU fans, they're one of the prime examples of that. But for SMU, there was some people that had the outside optimism that, well, if we can get past Florida State, well, then we could beat Louisville, at least on paper, and then all bets are off. And that's exactly what happened. And this entire ACC season was really interesting, just with Pitt making a run there for a bit, Louisville being a kind of a giant slayer, beating Clemson and being able to do some of the things that they did at times this season. And, look what Syracuse did. Miami actually put it together until they didn't. So they've seen it all this year. ACC fans have, and now for SMU, they get a chance to be the new kids on the block. There's really probably maybe a little bit of pressure on them, but no one expected them to be here. And now they've got to go out and win the thing because they're more than capable of. It's not a team that if you lucked their way in. They went out and won all the games they were put in front of. And, on the flip side of that, Clemson didn't. That's why it's got to be win and you're in for Clemson. And for SMU, they've taken care of business ever since Kevin Jennings has taken over. And they've been one of the best teams in the country since then.
Yeah, I want to talk about the game specifically, but I do feel like there's some pretty big picture stuff here that I don't want to save till later because I just feel like it's more, maybe a little more interesting even. But one of the things you just mentioned is, and I was asked this by somebody at Clemson, do you think that and you kind of answered it, but I want you to touch on it a little bit more. Do you think the lights could be too bright? Like Clemson's been there, done that at the ACC Championship. I mean, Cade came in as a freshman and ended up taking over for DJ and they won it with him there. Do you think that the pressure is a little bit on SMU from that perspective of, man, the lights are pretty bright. Now people kind of expect us to go out and win, being a favorite in this game?
Yeah, I think so to an extent. There's still a lot of pundits that are sitting there saying, well, we'll project SMU into the college football playoff bracket because they are the undefeated ACC team. They are the team that, is unbeaten in league play. But you're kind of seeing a lot of people kind of hedge and say, oh, if Clemson does this, they'll get in, obviously, and will SMU lose? There's a little bit more conversation around that. And I think part of that is, giving SMU the tip of the hat that, again, they've won the games that have been put in front of them. That's got to mean something in this league. When you look at what Clemson's done against good teams, not impressive. Georgia, Louisville, and then South Carolina, even Pitt was a comeback win. That's their best win. Whereas SMU went on the road and beat Louisville. They went and hosted Pitt and boat raced them. So they've done a lot of things that I think most people hadn't expected them to do. And at the same time, Clemson has not lived up to the standard that they want, and yet they find themselves here. So from the standpoint of pressure, I think in the actual game between the two teams, it's probably on SMU a little bit more. But the outside pressure is probably a little bit more on Clemson to maybe not let the new kids on the block do this and do what they've done all season. It's to jump back into the college football playoff race and get an auto bid through winning the ACC championship, which could ultimately propel both teams into the field. So I don't know. Dabo Sweeney, this Clemson team is going through a little bit of a midlife crisis, if you can call it that, with do they go with the portal? Do they not? They haven't done that at all. And at the same time, they're now facing all these questions, but they're still playing for a championship and coming off of a really disappointing loss against South Carolina. How do they get back not only emotionally after an emotional game, but there's a lot of things for Clemson to fix, especially offensively from that game. And really SMU has been doing what they've done all season, which is play complementary football. That's why they're in this position. Nick Saban's talked about it on College Game Day. SMU is the most complete team in the league. That's what they've done all year. They played great defense. They run the ball. Kevin Jennings has become a star in this league, and that's what's gotten him here. And I expect them to take that same attitude on Saturday night.
So the other thing I wanted to ask you, kind of big picture, is Mario Cristobal sitting at home this weekend, Lane Kiffin sitting at home this weekend, Kalen DeBoer sitting at home this weekend, and not Frank, Shane
Shane
Beamer
Beamer.
sitting at home this week. They can all petition for their teams and say this is why we deserve to get in for that last spot, right? I think everybody's pretty aware that the Big Ten's getting 4 teams in. We know of 3 SEC teams. Notre Dame, the ACC will get 1, whether it be SMU or Clemson. Notre Dame, we know there's really 1 spot up for grabs here, unless something really, really crazy happens in a conference championship game. Rhett really can't play that petition for your team. Now, obviously the argument exists. You just go out and win and it doesn't matter. But they are playing a good, a Clemson team that's very capable of winning. They're not like a 3-touchdown favorite or anything crazy like that. Rhett really can't play the game of we need to petition in case of a loss, because that kind of, demonstrates some, I don't know, just insecurity, I guess, to your team. You want to project positivity and not like, oh, if we lose, we deserve to get in. But, we've been told that conference championship games aren't going to penalize teams and they're not going to get hurt from that. And so if SMU is in with tonight's rankings, which again, I don't really think tonight's rankings mean anything, because we saw that last year. They didn't mean anything for years or for weeks. They only matter on Sunday. So I think it's an interesting spot that SMU is in, because in my opinion, if they go, and now if they were to get blown out by Clemson, that'd be one thing. But if they go to Charlotte and lose a close game, a 3-point game to a still very talented Clemson team who has underperformed this year, I get it. I still think they should be in, but I don't know that that's what the committee does, especially with that Alabama team sitting right there very close in the rankings.
Yeah, this is where we can get going on a rabbit hole for 15 minutes. And waiting for Rhett today, we actually did that as a little media group and talking about all the different angles of this.
All right, college football addicts, I got something for you. I am starting a new channel with one of my really good friends, Allie Peak. She covers the Gators and she's a big SEC homer. The channel is going to be called A Peek Inside the SEC, a play on her last name. She's a huge SEC homer, and I know you're wondering, why am I putting this in the middle of an ACC Championship preview? Well, I am not an SEC homer, and I am going to hold her feet to the fire, and there will be many, many good debates. You want to go check this out? We'll have a blast over there. I need your support. I need your help. Get on over and check it out. I've linked it above right now. You can subscribe. I've also put it down in the comments in the description. Listen, if you support, we're not selling you anything on this video. Just do me a favor and hit the subscribe button over there at A Peek Inside the SEC. Thank you, guys.
So right now, at least last I looked, an hour ago, somebody mentioned it in the press conference with Rhett, Alabama and SMU have the same odds to make the college football playoff. And I think that's a couple of different reasons. You can obviously point to quote unquote brand bias and expecting Alabama to have a good shot to make the college football playoff if SMU loses. You can also point it to Vegas is teasing people with that Alabama line. They're saying, oh, a team that is unbeaten in ACC play is the same odds as Alabama right now to make the college football playoff, and they haven't even played in their conference championship game yet. People are going to hammer Bama because you just figure, okay, boom, Bama's odds go up, SMU odds go down if they do lose on Saturday. And I think people are going to try to be hammering Bama to, try to take advantage of that. But here's the thing. I think there's another piece of this. SMU's unbeaten in ACC play. They've trailed for maybe 5 minutes, less than the amount of time we're going to end up on this pod in ACC games this season. And since Kevin Jennings has taken over, their advanced analytics, their statistics, they are legitimately one of the top 5 teams in the country on paper. And they've done that all, since Kevin has taken over. And on top of that, ESPN and college football playoff, let's just call it what it is. They're calling the shots. They don't have to decide between 3 SEC teams. They don't have to decide, okay, well, Alabama has looked like crap at times. They got beat up by Oklahoma. You got Ole Miss, who has a terrible loss to Kentucky at home. They've lost to Florida. They lost to LSU in overtime. You have South Carolina, who's been super hot lately, but also has a loss to Ole Miss, some other losses out there that stand out. They don't have to make that decision.
Yeah.
And if SMU can keep it respectable and lose by 3 or whatever to Clemson, that's got to cement them in the field, and it's going to be a cold night in Charlotte. It's going to be probably a home game for Clemson in a sense. It should be counted as another road game. I mean,
Yeah.
truthfully, if and not just from a travel perspective, but an actual crowd perspective. So if these things really aren't supposed to penalize you, I mean, Lane Kiffin said it a couple weeks ago. I mean, if you're going to go to a college, like for example, Georgia, right? Everybody thinks they're in. Joe Tessitore was talking about it on the broadcast. If they beat Georgia
Annoyingly.
Tech, I mean, everyone knows. Everyone knows Joe Tessitore how he feels that they're in, which is wild because if they go and lose to Texas, sure, now they've split against Texas during the season, but they lost Texas on a neutral site in Atlanta for the SEC championship. If that somehow knocks them out, I mean, Lane Kiffin's got a point. Who wants to play in the SEC championship if you're a team with a loss or 2 losses and then all of a sudden it knocks you out? When, let's be real, Indiana, Ohio State now to an extent. I'm still skeptical about Penn State, Notre Dame, schools like that. I mean, yeah, they lose, they're still in.
Yeah.
And Ohio
If
State, isn't. I don't think they're playing in the Big Ten championship this weekend, so they're fine.
yeah,
Like that's kind of what they're viewed as.
if
But
Indiana had to go play in Oregon this week, or if Tennessee had to go play at Texas or Georgia this
yeah,
week, or
they get boat
if
race.
Penn State had to go play, well, they are playing, I guess, but like,
Yeah.
yeah, if any of these other teams had to go, if Notre Dame had to go play in Oregon or Texas or something,
Yep.
we would have elimination games, but it really
Yeah.
shouldn't be for SMU,
Yeah. Exactly. They're playing a team that is, you know, I- Clemson has this. If SMU beats Clemson, it's not. I don't think it's their top 2 on SMU's resume. Like I think Louisville is a more impressive win. I think Pitt is a more impressive win. I mean, that's just the reality of Clemson's numbers are they play really well against bad teams, and then they, especially offensively, don't show up against good ones.
Yeah. So, and quick hot take, maybe you wouldn't expect this from the FSU guy. I think Miami should be in over Alabama. I know that's crazy. If Miami had the traditional Miami loss to like a 4-8 Georgia Tech team, I'd probably back off that. Or the 6-6 Syracuse that we're used to seeing. They lost to a 9-3 Syracuse and a really good Georgia Tech team that beat Florida State and Ireland, that took Georgia to 8 overtime. Now, again, if that was a 4-8 Georgia Tech team, a bad Syracuse team, I would get your argument. I'd say Miami
Yep.
really blew it. They lost to 2 really good teams and then beat everybody else they played. Beat a really good Florida team that has brought it on late, demolished them in the swamp. I think Miami should be in over Bama or any of these teams.
And think about if, and I know it's an if game, and everybody's got arguments, right? Like Ole Miss didn't have some of their best star defensive players against LSU. They didn't have them against Kentucky. Whatever. Like people have injuries, that happens throughout the year. But you look at Georgia Tech. Georgia Tech could very well be playing in this ACC championship if Haynes King's healthy all year long. I mean, that team is tough. I think I picked them third in my preseason ACC poll. Like that's how highly I think of the job they're doing there and where they were headed this year. But injuries kind of snuck up to them.
Yeah.
And 2-point conversions. Not that that would matter in the ACC race, but man, if they beat Georgia all of a sudden, that's a totally different loss for Miami.
Yeah.
But they still lost to Georgia, so it's not.
Yeah. So on the actual game, now that we've spent a lot of time opining around, which all the other stuff is really interesting too. SMU, I don't want to say that they're not a mirror image of South Carolina, but there are some similarities with South Carolina. A quarterback that can certainly use his legs, a really good running back, which Clemson struggled with last week, both of those things. A front. Now, this is not a shot at SMU because I just don't think anybody's front is as good as South Carolina's is really in the country, but a really good front on defense that can get after it. I think there are some very, very big similarities between what Clemson just saw last week and what they'll see this week. Is that a benefit to Clemson to having seen it already, or is it a benefit to SMU knowing like, hey, we got the tools to go in and win? I'm going to find out Saturday night at 8:00. But just thoughts on the way that the teams match up.
I all year long, every SMU fan, every SMU pundit was probably saying, hey, if there's a matchup that SMU would want, it'd probably be against Miami. They play bad defense, get into a shootout. SMU's defense can contain Cam Ward, all of those things. But the more I dive down into what Clemson has done on the field this year, and don't get me wrong, they have athletes, they have big bodies, they probably even, I know Miami looks good off the bus, but Clemson might look a little bit better off the bus. Like I compare Clemson for SMU to facing Florida State early in the year, kind of not knowing how bad the wheels would obviously fall off. But Dabo has a standard that has been proven over many many years, and they find a way to play to that floor. And so that's why Clemson's in the position they are at with this team that they have. That is an imperfect team that hasn't shown that they can play well against relatively good teams outside of come back over Pitt. So what I see from Clemson is I see a defense that has some big bodies that can really affect SMU's game plan. Like if they are not with it on the offensive line this week and they can't get a push and they can't open holes, I mean, we're looking at a game that could look similar to a South Carolina Clemson type of game. I mean, we could see this game stay below 20 points. I don't know if that works in SMU's favor. Like they want to get out, they want to start fast, they want to be up 10-0 early on in this game, and that's something they've been able to do against a lot of teams. And then you also factor in, SMU having to deal with some of the gazelles that they have out there at receiver, similar to what we were talking about going into that FSU game. How would SMU's defensive backs hold up against that group? And Clemson will have to contain this SMU defensive line that is deep, that comes in waves, all of those things. But what I overall see between these two teams is I think the speed factor goes towards SMU. And when you don't have the speed, Pitt found out. Pitt was chasing SMU around the field all day, both sides of the ball. I mean, that was a bloodbath, and it could have been worse. SMU kind of called the dogs off in the fourth quarter. And that's something that I think when you look at style points and you look at how SMU's run through the ACC this year, they've done that. Like they've gone not full turtle, but close to it in some of these games where they could have hung, 60 something points on Pitt, and they could have hung 60 points on a pretty good Cal team last weekend, but they pulled the starters with 6 minutes left, 8 minutes left in the game, and they still scored. So this SMU team has a lot of team speed, and I'm intrigued to see, in particular, in the run game for SMU versus Clemson's defensive front, which is really good. Barrett Carter, TJ Parker, Peter Woods, all those guys. I've covered those guys for a long time, knew them as recruits. It's a good front, and they're one of the better defenses in the country. But stopping the run has not been their strong suit. I think they're 77th or somewhere around there in stopping the run. And you take all of that, and you've got to remember in some of these games that they've played really well against bad teams. And in the good teams, it's not gone well. And when SMU can get out and get running and hit some explosives in the run game, open up things for Kevin Jennings, he's finding Matthew Hibner, their Michigan transfer tight end who's come on late. The wide receivers are really playing well. If Clemson's defense is kind of chasing SMU around in this game, that's where it plays to SMU's advantage. If SMU's offensive line can't open holes, can't find that push, can't stay disciplined, and that's another thing, SMU had 17 penalties for over 100 yards last week, you watch where this can go. But if they play turnover free, win the turnover battle, and kind of jump out to a hot start and make Clemson chase them, that's where SMU's been at its best this year. Really, in ACC play, only Boston College has been able to overcome a fast start by SMU, make it a ball game, take a lead, and then it is in the balance there late. Tell you this, SMU in the fourth quarter, Louisville found out, Boston College found out. They're really good in that fourth quarter and closing teams out. And that's where if it is a kind of 7-point game going into the fourth quarter, that's where SMU over the last 2 years has really been strong, is closing out these games. So I've got SMU by 10 in this one. I think they've got to hit the 30-point mark. Here's a stat for you. Between Pitt, Georgia, Louisville, and South Carolina, Clemson has only surpassed 21 points once, and that was against Pitt, scoring 24. So the offense going against a top 5 rush defense, one of the best defenses in college football, and SMU, if Cade Klubnik can't get things going, I mean, this could get ugly if SMU's on their game.
Yeah, they have, and even that Pitt game that you mentioned, it took kind of a last second Cade rush, kind of miracle comeback, which we all kind of thought at that point, like, oh, there went Clemson season, like that Pitt just beat them. Took kind of a miracle for them to even surpass that point total there, and they haven't really been built to come back. They if you get a lead on them, they become pretty predictable. Cade's legs to me feel like, and they almost were the difference in that South Carolina game. Obviously his 2 touchdowns. Cade's legs feel like if there's going to be an X factor, which I do really like their young wide receivers. I like Moore, who's right down the road from me here.
Yeah.
Well, you too, originally here in
Yeah.
Tampa at TC. You're well aware, and I like Wesco too a lot. And those guys are really good. Don't get me wrong. And Moffa does a good job, but Cade's legs to me feel like the X factor, in the game. If Clemson's going to find a way to win, he's going to have to be pretty special, which he's shown at times he can be. No team is set up well to, nobody likes to defend a mobile quarterback. It's just a numbers thing, right? Like no, oh man, great, a guy that runs too. But I would say like SMU seeing it every day in practice, also having the speed that they do on defense, maybe a little bit better equipped, and get your thoughts there and wrap up.
Yeah, I think one, you look at what Lenore Sellers was able to do against Clemson's defense. I mean, he's a bigger version of Kevin Jennings and just kind of what he can do and extend plays and some of that magic. So definitely something to watch there on Clemson's defensive side of things. But Cade's legs, he's been able to get around 40, 50 yards a game on the ground. It's what I've kind of seen from him. And I do think that's an X factor. But if SMU is able to tee off on him a little bit, and it's not necessarily maybe designed runs that are killing them. Like if Cade Klubnik finds a way to get 100 yards, that's red flag for SMU, unless they just shut down Phil Maffa, who's been banged up. That's another thing. Marcus Tate, their incredible guard, has been banged up. But if they can't get the ground game going and they've got to chuck it around 50 times,
Yeah.
I don't know if that's a good thing for Clemson, especially, again, I go back to, and the reason why I go back to a lot of these things for SMU is because it's not rocket science how they've been able to beat teams this year. And when they don't beat themselves, and you look back on the BYU game in particular, they completely beat themselves in the red zone, but they stay ahead on turnovers. They start fast and force teams to chase them. And if Clemson kind of has to abandon the run game and be one dimensional, I'm telling you, SMU's defensive line they can get after the quarterback. And especially the last 2 weeks, they've had more sacks than they've allowed points in the last 2 games. And I know it's Virginia and Cal, but I don't know if I've seen that very often. You'd have to go back to probably those Alabama, LSU type of defenses that were allowing 6 points a game in the early 2000s. That was a different story. But it's a defensive line that once they get you out of your game plan, and that's what made BC, their performance against SMU, very impressive. It's tough. I mean, because they might give up a first down here or there. They might give up even an explosive, but they're going to get right back to playing their scheme, their assignments, and they're just talented deep. I mean, they've got guys. They've got a 2 deep that is really impressive, and so for Cade, if he can extend plays, that's something to keep an eye on. Grayson James was able to do that. That was kind of a not red flag, but kind of red flag game. SMU did not have Elijah Roberts in that game, who really should be right up there and should lead the nation in pressures if he had another game. But he's a huge X factor in this one, controlling Cade and just trying to force Clemson to be one dimensional. That's the big key.
Yeah. Billy, I appreciate you, man, for your time and hanging out with us. Where can people follow you? Where can they find more of your work?
Yeah, you can check us out at ontheponyexpress.com. We've got all the info there for you guys on the Mustangs going into this game against Charlotte.
Awesome, man. Enjoy Charlotte, bundle up, and have fun.
Thanks so much. Appreciate it.